Native Americans inhabited the Great Plains, a region of grasslands in the west-central part of the country. They followed a lifestyle that was focused on buffalo and horses. The horse meant they could travel and hunt more easily. The buffalo provided food, clothes, and other necessities. By the 1700s, many of the Great Plains Indians had migrated from their fields to hunt. The Great Plains Indians lived in compact, extended family units. For nourishment, the men went hunting. The buffalo hides that the men brought back to camp were prepared and the animals butchered by the women. Thousands of white settlers arrived in the Great Plains after the Civil War. White settlers insisted they could stake their claim since Native Americans had not settled down and improved the land. More people were able to migrate west thanks to railroad expansion, which also had an impact on how the government treated Native Americans who lived in the Great Plains. First, the Great Plains were handled as a large reservation by the government. It drafted treaties that established national borders when it required more territory for railroads. Native Americans, however, disregarded the treaties, hunted on their land, and engaged in conflict with settlers and miners. In 1864, one of the more terrible battles took place. For the winter, the Cheyenne were making their way back to the Sand Creek Reservation in Colorado. A militia colonel received a telegraph from an army commander ordering him to attack the Native Americans. The Sand Creek Massacre was an attack by the colonel and his soldiers that resulted in the deaths of over 150 Cheyenne. Fighting persisted. Sioux leaders were coerced into signing the Treaty of Fort Laramie, which required them to reside on reservations. However, a significant Sioux chief named Sitting Bull refused to sign the agreement. 4 years after the Fort Laramie Treaty, miners began exploring the Black Hills for gold. Native American nations opposed this invasion. There was a gold rush in the region by 1874. Native American complaints to the government were unsuccessful. Then, at the Little Bighorn River in 1876, Sitting Bull and other Native Americans defeated Army troops under the command of George Custer. Custer and all of his soldiers were fatally wounded when the Sioux decisively prevailed. Custer's last stand is the name given to this conflict. But the troops bounced back. The army overcame the Sioux in a few months. The American government established an assimilation strategy to address the Native American issue. Native Americans would renounce their cultural practices and beliefs in order to adapt white culture. The extinction of the buffalo was another setback for tribal existence. Buffalo were shot for sport by travelers and fur traders. The Plains Indians had almost no access to buffalo as a source of food, clothing, shelter, and fuel. Native Americans started to go further in search of food. This implied that reservations couldn't satisfy their requirements. To make Native Americans farmers, the government made a decision. The Dawes Act was enacted by Congress in 1887. The act dismantled reservations and distributed some land for farming to each Native American family. The Dawes Act's provisions were not well understood by Native Americans, which was a major factor in the plan's failure. They were unfamiliar with the concept of owning private land. Both sickness and poverty plagued the Sioux. They adopted a ceremony known as the Ghost Dance in the hopes that it would help them reclaim their lands and ways of life. This bothered military leaders who made the decision to detain Sitting Bull. He was killed. Army personnel gathered up a Sioux tribe soon after and transported them to a camp at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. Native Americans were forced to surrender all of their weapons by the military. Up to 300 Sioux were massacred. They allowed their bodies to freeze. The Battle of Wounded Knee was the name given to this incident. The Indian Wars came to an end as a result.